once again, Sewing World. Gentleman Jim, the tailor.
Victoria Baylor, the professional dressmaker. And of course, we make up the duo, the tailor
And
the dressmaker. It's us guys again. Excited to be with you once again. Another week has passed, and we couldn't wait to get back to you, so we're excited about that.
This is going to be an exciting show.
It really is. So we take time out, believe it or not, which I'm sure you do. We love to bring you kind of new and innovative thinking, innovative ways to think about different types of materials and topics. And today's show should be no different. We will be discussing vintage and retro patterns today.
That we will be. There's some people say vintage, some people say retro. So let me kind of give you an insight on what that's about. The vintage look really is what we call vintage is earlier than the 50s. And a lot of the patterns are earlier than the 50s. The retro part of it came about, that's more of a newer word, retro, meaning re. So let's look at it this way. Vintage, technically, what they classify vintage is really anything 20 to 25 years old. So if you really want to look at clothing, and what they're talking about is anything back in the 80s. But that's not the look that we're talking about. We're going back to the 30s, late 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. That, to me, is vintage.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for clarifying that, because that's usually the issue that most people have is what defines vintage versus retro. And as we know today in mainstream media, you know, shows like Downton Abbey and Mad Men have made.
That show.
Is it a good show? Really? Yeah. I haven't checked that one out. I've seen Mad Men, and I got lost after
they're so tailored in Mad Men.
Oh, that's right. That's right. A tailor would know and respect those types of clothes. But those kind of shows have kind of brought back this research interest in vintage clothing. So, so today we're going to talk about how to take vintage patterns, how to adjust those, make them look, you know, whether you want to go for the more vintage look or you want to modernize it. We'll talk about that today. Mr. Jim has like a vault full of some of the best vintage patterns. So we'll get to show those off, and he'll give you also some of his insider tips since he's an expert at sewing vintage. I have not sewn much myself. Actually, I have not sewn any. So I think this is going to be a real good, nice kick in the butt for me to get to it. But anyway, he'll give you some of his sewing tips on how to do that correctly, because there are some.
Oh, it's a lot of difficulties in sewing vintage patterns. Now, I don't mean difficulties because of the sewing. The difficulties come more so in the sizing than the sewing.
That's right. Yeah, so because you can kind of tell with some of these patterns, it's funny, they're drafted where the person like has a waist that's probably like 20 inches around. Ooh.
Nobody.
No, that's kind of not, you know, up to standard measurements for today. So those definitely, you want to catch Mr. Jim's insights about that. And I'll have to be honest, ever since I saw the pussy bow blouse come back, you know, that's the blouse that has like the big bows in the front. I've been kind of curious about this vintage thing too, so I'm interested in hearing some of his insights. And lastly, before we kind of switch over to showing you patterns, if you're having an issue with defining errors, which sometimes I do, I recommend this really great coffee book by DK, and I think the Smithsonian helped, you know, provide a lot of the photos, but it really shows fashion and costuming throughout the ages, and you can really see a lot of the different eras in here and the differences in clothing. And this is really great because, as Mr. Jim, you know, and I kind of alluded to, what's old becomes new again, doesn't it? Isn't that what you think?
Absolutely. See, this is a new modern book, and I have this one by Turner Wilcox. This is an old book. I don't even know if it's still in print. This book here costs $5.95.
Oh, Lord.
So, but this also has the same period. This period goes all the way back to more of your modern times. This book, though, everything is just a drawing, whereas the one that Victoria has, it has photographs as well as the colorful drawing. This is all in black and white.
But those are really great drawings, and then there's little bits of captions with it.
It gives a little everything, and it
very nice.
Talks about the different periods, and tells you about the era of time and how clothes were worn there.
So that's kind of a really nice historical reference read if you want it, with great line drawings.
You need, if you're going to be in this industry, you need reference. You just can't take it per chance, because a lot of times they don't have a pattern. See? So you have to figure out how to recreate this pattern based on an era, a look, and a time that you might want or a client of yours might want.
And even as a budding fashion designer, which I myself am as well, it's really great to take a look back so you can kind of get inspiration and you can take those ideas, because truly nothing's like a new idea.
It's
it
really
just
not.
usually
It's
is
really
kind of a recycled idea with your perspective and insight. So it's kind of neat to kind of delve back in history like that. So we're going to go ahead and take that little trip back, I guess in our little time machine, so to speak, and look at some of these awesome vintage patterns.
All right.
Let's do that now.
All right, now these are some patterns. This is just a few of them, because these are my favorites. And I've made at least 75% of all these patterns, so I physically know what works, what doesn't work. But this is a Vogue pattern 2787. I'm currently working on this dress as we speak. Here's another Vogue. Okay, this is pattern 2636. I've made this. I was very pleased with this one here. This is one of my favorites. I've made this one here, and that's a Vogue 2786. So as you see, a lot of the ones that I'm showing you, I've made these patterns. So I want to keep you abreast, and I'll tell you what goes right and what goes wrong in some of these. Now I'm going to move these over here for a minute. So I'll go down the list. This is another one that I've made. This is a 2241 Vogue pattern there. This is very nice. This could be used in today's world because there's so many gowns that are made and so many formals. But this pattern dates back to 1931. Here's another one. These just happen to be Vogue's part of, you could say, vintage, and they call theirs vintage there. This is a 2610. This is very nice, and once again, it could be made in today's world based on this vintage or retro look that people are dealing with. So as I go on and on and on with some of these, this is a Butterick, see, so it's not just Vogue that is doing these. Butterick makes some of these vintage, and this is a 5209. This is a very elegant pattern. This too could be worn in today's world. You see a lot of recreations on the red carpet of a lot of these kind of styles, but changed differently, because that's all we're doing is we're recreating, and this is 2354. Now this is one of my very best favorites. See? Now that style there, 2401, you would think back, if you're old enough, to Lauren Bacall, Betty Davis, those type of women that we saw on stage all the time. See? So we go from there to a variation of patterns. Now these happen to be Vogue. Now, for a businesswoman, this is very elegant. This is what they wore back. This is in the 40s there. So you have that. Now all of a sudden we switch and we get into this, what they're calling retro look. This is a Butterick. Now you have to remember, Butterick and Vogue are the same company. Butterick is the parent company, so they're subsidiaries of each other. But these patterns here, Butterick, kind of show you this type of look. That reminds you of Lucille Ball back in the days when those type of shows were on TV. Now, here's one of my favorites. I have not made this pattern yet. Now, this would be a period piece for a costume for something. The something, I'm not sure yet, but if you did one like that. Okay. Then you have some vintage coat patterns. These are just your swing patterns. This also is a Butterick, 4929. That's a Vogue. I'm sorry, that's a Butterick. Okay. And here's a Simplicity. That pattern there is 0519. The swing coats are coming back again. I make a lot of those because I like that coat there. Now, this is more of a jacket coat. This is a Simplicity, vintage, 1950s. This would give you that look. This would be Lucille Ball's look again. If you guys remember, I Remember Lucy, this is it. And then you have some tops and some blouses. Some of these are coming back. Now, you have to be very careful of these because if you see this tight fit in the waist, you got to remember your waist isn't like that anymore. But this is retro. They're calling it retro, vintage, 1940s. And this one here gets into the kind of what I consider the end of the so-called vintage look. And this is the 60s, right at the 60s. This reminds you of Jackie Kennedy with the little pillbox hat and the little short crop jackets. But if you look at a lot of these, this is today's style. The only thing they've done today is make the sleeves longer. So if you get into those, that's what we have. Now, I'm going to show you here some things that I have done with a lot of these patterns that technically has made them today's style. All right here I have some vintage patterns, some vintage dresses that I made, but I changed the fabrication. Now, you know seersucker's coming back. I happen to make these out of seersucker. They didn't make dresses back then out of seersucker. So these are just a few different styles that I made off of vintage patterns. But you see, I made them out of seersucker. Now, this particular one here is this Vogue pattern. But I made it out of seersucker. This pattern here has been one of my favorites. Now, let me tell you something about this. I've made the dress, I've made the coat. I took this exact pattern and changed the look. And I made this coat here in a more modern day fabrication. This is, you see, is a dinner coat. This is what we called an evening coat or evening jacket, because some of them were shorter than that. As you see, she's wearing it over a gown. I took that same pattern and I made this coat here out of wool. Now, I didn't change the pattern at all. I just made it out of wool and I put these frogs on it. Now, that's that same coat. I made it larger because this is more of an evening coat that fitted close. This would be an outer coat that you can wear. So that's all I've done. Now, let me show you what else I did with this pattern here. This is the exact same jacket as that, and I did it in denim. Right. I did it in denim. So this shows you what you can do with the same pattern, but change the fabrication. This is a good thing to know, that if you look at a pattern and it's made out of that, you can change the look by just changing the fabrication. Now, I want to tell you some things that can change on some of these patterns that it just doesn't work in today's world. When you deal with these patterns here, you have to remember, now the only thing that they didn't do when they reproduced, because all these patterns had to be reproduced, okay? They did not change the body dimension of today's woman. These patterns are cut real small. I mean real small. So you almost have to take any one of these patterns, and if you're going to make a size 10, for argument's sake, this pattern sizing goes from 6, 8, and 10. What you really need to get is a 14 for it to fit today's woman. So you need to either know how to grade this up, or hopefully you can find the same pattern number, but make it in a size 14 rather than a 10. So that's what happens, because this is what happens. Not only is it a slimmer fit, the armholes are very narrow on these. The waistlines is much, much, much too small. So if you think you're going to get this size and you're going to fit in it, you better rethink that, because they are small. As you notice, all these women are very, very slender. This could possibly work for what they show on runways where the women are very, very small. Well, we'll give you some startling statistics that were taken some time ago. What you see and what the reality is false to a point. There's only 17% of women that are this size. So that means that 83% of women are not that size. So you can't judge what you see on the picture or on the runway. So you can't buy something based on this look. Like I say, 17% opposed to 83%. Because those were the numbers there. I don't know what they are now. They might even have changed to less. But they always show slim models, and we all know that's not your average age woman. So these are the things that you have to look out for. Now, something like this, it's the same thing. This would be very narrow here. The arms would be very narrow. We have to be real, and I'm real about the look of today's woman compared to what the real size is. This is not going to work on today's women. Most women's arms are larger than that. We all know that this waistline doesn't work anymore. See? So you have to be very careful when you take any vintage or retro pattern that's in a dress or a skirt and make it work. It just won't work. It just won't work. Now, if you get into a coat like this here, these aren't far off because the coat is full, and a swing coat allows for plenty of room. So you're all right when it comes to coats, but when it comes to dresses, and mainly dresses and blouses, you have to be very, very careful, very, very careful. If you look at this blouse pattern here, we all know this is an unrealistic look because women's waistlines are not that small. This you could get away with some of the top part of it because it's an open sleeve, so if you have a little larger arm, you're right there. But you better increase that waist because that is not going to fit, and you are not going to get it to look like that on you because this is just too narrow here. No woman has this waist size except maybe, just maybe, it's that 17% that I'm talking about. But that 83% that it's not, you better check these before you just grab a size, cut it out, and expect it to work. Those are some tips that I have for you on these vintage patterns and how they work and how they don't work. But you need to be very good on rescaling them, or you need to get at least 2 sizes up on them for them to come close. And then you still need to measure them to be sure.
Okay, everybody, hopefully you've enjoyed the information that we presented today. You know, Mr. Jim was able to show you some of his prize collection vintage/retro patterns, which are nice because I never seen them before. So I'm excited to have got to sneak peek those myself.
They're in that box.
They're in that box. I'm eyeballing that box. I'm going to stay away from it. But if anything, I don't know about, I hope for you, I've really gotten interested in just vintage and retro feel, just kind of the yesteryear look. It's very neat.
I had a store in Atlanta once, and it was called Vintage New. By that is I took all the vintage patterns, but I made new clothes out of them. So I always called it Vintage New. Now, with that said, my line has always been classic is forever classic.
And it really is.
It really is.
So that's actually great because that actually transitions us into our last segment, which is to take a look at some of these wonderful vintage patterns that Mr. Jim presented us with today, and show you how to take different types of fabrics to change their look. So we'll do that. But before we do, I want to definitely compliment you. Thank you for the information you shared about sizing. A lot of people don't realize that the dimensions on some of these patterns are so much different than how modern day women are shaped. So it's kind of nice to keep that in mind, because I know I don't have that type of waistline, and we didn't say any of that to make anybody feel bad. It's just realistically some of these were drafted very, very small.
They are.
So we don't want you to miss out on the fun. I'm not going to miss out on the fun. I'm just going to grade up.
That's it, grade up, or
that's
buy
right.
a bigger pattern.
Buy a bigger pattern.
And you need to be a minimum of 2 sizes up.
That's right.
On that. So whatever size you are, just get 2 sizes up. 1 size will not do it on these patterns.
That's right. And fortunately, at least for a lot of them, if it's the waist, that's usually an easy alteration to make. So thankfully, phew. But to your point, some of the patterns had such complex seaming, the way it curved and angled and darts in neat places. Just don't stress yourself out about trying to make those adjustments. If you just feel like you can, then move on. There's a sea of other vintage patterns you can make out there too. So. Okay, so let's look at some of these before we go and check out. I love this one in particular. It's a really pretty 2-piece set, and I like the top actually.
It is.
So,
That's very stylish.
Now, I'm not one for really, really long skirts because I'm really, really tall and I tend to disappear in body dimensions. But for this, you could just, instead of making the whole, there you go. And then actually this is a dress, so I thought it was 2 pieces. I stand corrected. But you could shorten that dress, absolutely, the skirt part of it, or you could just use the top. I so happen to just like the top. So you could take the top itself, which has a really nice little tuck knot, and you can use, and what I like to call grandma's couch fabric. That's just what I like to call. You've probably seen this before. I had it in another segment. But you could use a fabric like this and then put it with a cute little pair of capris or something. So you got a little bit of vintage retro with, a little bit of sass with your little cute capris. This top is really, really cute. And again, according to the look of it, you can tell the waistline's a little bit really small, but we talked about adjusting that. But even the cute little peplum, I think it has in the back. A fabric like this would be really, really nice for something like that. It's kind of, has like almost, it's not a paisley, but it has that kind of feel with a lot of mixture of flowers and colors and stuff like that. You can do something like that, and then you have buttons that'll go down the middle. You can play around with different types of buttons. Really, really cute. I love gowns, so I think you can never be too dramatic, and this one was definitely a stunning piece.
That's a knockout. That's a
really,
knockout
really nice
gown. I've made that on several occasions. That's a knockout gown.
And what you want to spend time doing, which is sometimes, I think these patterns show really nice. You can see the design lines. This is probably too small for you to see, so I'll hold it up. But anyway, this is really cut up a lot of different ways.
It's cut up. It's cut up. But
so
the pieces fit.
They do.
They fit.
And in a case like that, Mr. Jim would agree, when you have so much intricate seaming, it's really great to go with a plain color.
Plain.
Because you can really see that. And when I see this, I say, let's just take it up a notch. So you have like the older school, you can go a little bit more regal with this beautiful kind of oceany looking blue. It is nice, and it has a little, it's kind of a sateen. It might be a little bit heavy for this, but I want you to pay attention to the color. The color is divine and it has a little bit of a sheen to it. Very, very nice. But if you want to punch it up even more, why not go with like a charmeuse? I love this color. That's nice, really vibrant. So that's kind of a way to take an older style and to kind of kick it up a notch by making it a little bit more vibrant with color. And you can always play with color to do that. And Pantone has its colors of the year. You can pick whatever one is hot for right now, the fall colors, and then make this gown. Also, this, of course, is the typical 50s style, like you said, Lucille Ball.
Lucille Ball.
Full skirt. That's right, dress.
I love Lucy.
That's right. I mean, who didn't? You could do this. You could use a stiffer fabric to kind of make it puff out. But even with styles like this, if you use something a little bit looser or with more of a drape, you can kind of change the look of this and make it a little bit more everyday. And add like a interesting print. And I like this. It's kind of like a shirting type of fabric, maybe so to speak. I mean, you can use it for shirts. But, you know, you could use something like this for this type of dress, shorten the dress, make some changes to it. That's really, really cute. You know, you could make it in this color and then make the collars a solid color. Just use your imagination with these. Don't let vintage patterns just throw you off of your game. And then this is really cute. Wow. That's a gorgeous pattern there, and I love all the pieces. And that top in particular really sticks out for me. And again, you can, let's see, I only have 2 pieces of fabric remaining, so we're gonna get creative here. Let's see. For this, I do a lot of dresses, believe it or not, with overlays.
Yeah.
And even though this does have a good bit of seaming, and it does, I look like a keyhole, but it has like a little diamond in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You could do this on laid over black, and it's really, really pretty.
That would be real nice over black.
That's right.
Over
And
black.
it's a knit, so it kind of changes the feel of the gown. So it's not a satin, which is probably what's recommended for here. Yep, they recommend satin, silks, crepes, challis. Completely change the look of the gown, and it becomes more of a modern type of gown. And you can usually do that. And laces are great. You know, if I keep talking on and on about this, I think Mr. Jim created a monster. Laces are really great because I think they kind of are the best of both worlds, and they can give you a retro feel and at the same time can be modern, and you can kind of play around with that. This is kind of a more older looking type of lace, and I think the color makes that, kind of lends to that, and there's a lot of good texture with this one too, so you can kind of incorporate that. So what we're here to just say today is that if you have not thought about giving vintage and retro patterns a try, you should. If at very least, just take a look back, and you know, you'd be surprised, and Mr. Jim pointed this out today, I'm gonna grab this pattern, how many times those looks show up even in patterns where they don't state it. So this is the McCall's pattern from, I guess, a few seasons ago. It's not listed as vintage, it's not listed as retro, but to Mr. Jim's point, when he saw it, the first thing he spotted was this blouse. He's like, oh, that's like a blouse that Lauren Bacall would have worn.
Lauren Bacall, Joan, all of them.
That's
back
right.
in the 50s, maybe even into the 40s. But this blouse was real popular back in the 80s. It came and it went. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. And now you're seeing it again. Listen, there's nothing wrong with that look. Maybe for a younger woman, but for a middle-aged woman, they love that style. They love that style.
Because it's classic.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And they can't find it. They can't find
It's
it.
really cute. Now I want one this weekend. But what we're trying to say is chances are you have been either sewing,
Sure.
wearing,
Sure.
you know, vintage clothing or clothing that has vintage elements. So just keep an open mind when you are planning your wardrobe, planning your sewing projects, and actually just take a look this way if you haven't done so far. So hopefully this segment has been super helpful for you guys. You've enjoyed
It's
the
been
material.
helpful to me.
It has to me, and really, I own some vintage pattern, but I hadn't thought of like really delving into that period. So I am now.
Good.
Really excited
Leave my
about that.
patterns alone.
I will leave your patterns alone. I won't steal any patterns. Okay, so that concludes today's sessions. Enjoyed having you guys around as always.
Really did.
As
really
always, we will see you again next week. Stay tuned. Facebook. We're on YouTube, of course, for all updates, new information, all that stuff. So take care. Okay. Bye.
Did. Bye now.